Good morning and a very warm welcome to BP's HQ. I'm here with experts from BP and DHL to discuss how to drive your commercial fleets into the future. To kick off, three things about me. My name's Tim Wallace. I'm Head of Content at DVV Media, working primarily on motor transport and commercial motor magazines and the websites. I've been in the industry about 5 years now. Second point, I'm here to discuss what's probably the biggest challenge facing the transport and logistics industry right now. And thirdly, I'm independent, so I'll be asking hopefully some searching questions to our panel. And now to the main event. Let me introduce you to our panel for today. To my right, I have Robert Spicer, BP's Head of Transport and Future Mobility.
Hi, guys.
Then there's Alex Efitimu, BP. I knew I'd have problems with that pronunciation. Then he's BP's VP of Fleets.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, everyone.
Mobility and Convenience Europe. And finally, Oliver Bishop, BP's VP for Lower Carbon Energy, Customers and Products.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone.
And online we have Michael Lohmeyer, Vice President of Clean Ops at DHL.
Hello, good morning.
So today's discussion looks like this. Robert will share the latest trends BP predicts for the truck industry for the energy transition. I'll then talk to Robert, Alex and Oliver about BP solutions to help businesses decarbonise commercial fleets. And we'll hear how those solutions are working from Michael from DHL. There'll be time for your questions as well, so please submit your questions as the Q&A facility is now open, I believe. To ask a question, please just click on the question icon you can see. It should be on the left-hand side of your screen. So, Robert, over to you. What is the latest energy outlook telling us about the transition for trucks across Europe?
OK, thank you, Tim. Well, good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to give you some kind of initial content about how we see the energy transition and what it means for commercial truck fleets. So I'm going to talk about three things. We're going to talk a little bit about our scenarios. I'm going to talk a little bit about the key factors that shape how we think about energy and transition in transportation. And I'm going to show just a couple of views from our outlook, particularly about the energy mix in road transportation. So let's start with this chart. The BP Energy Outlook features two main scenarios: current trajectory and net zero. And they explore a range of potential outcomes for the energy system out to 2050. Current trajectory does what it says on the tin. It tries to capture the broad pathway along which the global energy system is travelling. It places weight on climate policies enacted and on government aims and pledges for future decarbonisation. But at the same time, it takes account of the many, many challenges that are associated with meeting those aims. Net zero explores how different elements of the energy system could change to achieve a substantial reduction in energy emissions, in emissions, carbon emissions from energy use. And in that way, our net zero scenario can be thought of as a what-if scenario. What if, elements of the energy system collectively across the world acted to reduce emissions? It clearly assumes a significant tightening in climate policies. Now, it's important to stress something here. Both these scenarios will be wrong. Okay? But what I think we would like you to think is that these two scenarios provide a rough sense of how the global energy system might evolve under different assumptions. And we think that's kind of helpful. And we think it's helpful in two ways. One is it helps us to inform us in building strategies that might be resilient to these uncertainties. And the second way it can be helpful is it just helps us to look at, to identify common trends that, again, should help us develop better business strategies. Next, I want to turn to the pace of the transition or the risk of delay. The basic issue here is that the global energy system, if the global energy system remains on its current pathway, the harder and potentially more costly it will be to meet the Paris climate goals. Now, as many of you are aware, the Paris climate goals are essentially to limit global emissions and the temperature rise associated with them to well below 2 degrees, and to pursue efforts to limit temperature rises to 1.5 degrees. And when you think about these goals, you actually really need to think about cumulative emissions, the emissions over time. And that's what we show in the right-hand chart here. Now, the IPCC does not estimate a carbon budget specifically for a well below 2 degree kind of environment, but it does provide us with a carbon budget for a 2 degree case, and we show that here on the chart, and it's the horizontal blue line at about 900 gigatons of CO2. Below it, in addition on the chart, we show the cumulative emissions pathways of our scenarios. And you can see our net zero scenario lies well below that budget, but our current trajectory scenario cuts through the carbon budget in the early 2040s. And that's an issue. And the implication is that the longer we kind of stay on our current pathway, the harder it's going to be to stay within that budget, and the greater implication is that if we delay action, the economic and social costs of transition are going to be higher. So, we explore a lot more of this in our main outlook, which you can find on bp.com. But the essential point is that the world needs to start transitioning, and we think that the latest point, roughly, that we can stay on our current trajectory without transitioning is about the turn of the next decade. So it kind of says that things need to start happening soon. In that way. Now, if we think about our outlook, it's shaped by many things, but 3 really stand out. The first is that it's driven quite a lot by macroeconomics, and there is kind of some positive things that we can think about that, particularly for the trucking market. As our economies grow, we expect more goods movement, and globally, it looks, our feeling is that the demand for trucking will probably grow by about 70% over the next 30 years. In Europe, we think that growth will probably be smaller. Our economies are more mature, and more of our economy is driven by the growth in service consumption. But still, we think there will be growth, and by 2050, probably the trucking market in Europe is probably 30% bigger than we have today. Other factors also are important in this, and in particular, we can talk about 2 more. One is policy, and the other is technology. Now, policy here, we're really thinking about policies to combat carbon emissions. And the table on the left just highlights one policy area, which is essentially mandates for zero-emission vehicles. And as you can see, we can see policy in action all over the world, not just here in Europe, but all over the world, on light duty vehicles, on medium and heavy trucks, and even on buses. And that's an important point, really, that to tackle carbon emissions, it isn't about one sector. We're going to need to see action across the board, all the sectors of road transport, if we're going to kind of reduce emissions and tackle those climate change issues. And there's linkage, actually, with technology here, because technology provides, for us, part of the solution. In particular, we can talk a bit about batteries. because batteries are kind of critical to the use of electricity in vehicles. Without an energy storage solution on a vehicle, you're not going to be able to use electricity, and particularly renewable electricity on a battery. Over the past decade, the cost of batteries, particularly lithium-ion batteries, has fallen very significantly, and that's what's making light-duty electric vehicles, the cars that we see now on the roads, much more feasible. And that there is a flow through to the batteries that we can use and will be using in heavier vehicles, right, in that sense. And particularly over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen this actually start to fall quite significantly as well. And it really means that I now think, and we think, that it's an increasingly likely prospect that the electrification of medium and heavy duty trucking can come to pass. Moving on, we've got a couple of views here from the BP Energy Outlook. And the first is about oil demand. And in these charts, you can see how we believe that oil demand over the long term will fall. The speed and extent of that decline kind of varies depending on the scenario. But road transportation is incredibly important to that movement. And that's because, as you're probably well aware, road transportation is about 60%, forms about 60% of oil demand today. And over time, we believe that as the global fleet moves to decarbonized solutions, the implication is that oil demand, fossil fuel demand, will fall. And we think the main vector for that will be electrification. So if we move to the last chart here, you can start to see how we think about the impact of electrification. On the left-hand side, we show our views on light-duty vehicles. And on the right-hand side, we've got here what we think about medium and heavy-duty trucks. In light-duty, the vehicle park today, about 1.5 billion vehicles, will grow very significantly. And that's due to the increasing prosperity, particularly in emerging markets. But it will also, over time, switch increasingly to electric vehicles. More aggressively in developed markets. But if we're going to get to net zero, we're also going to see a lot of electric vehicles in emerging markets. In the truck fleet, we think that electrification will come. But it's slower. As you can see here, to 2035, the proportion of the energy use of electricity is much smaller, and it's much bigger in the second half of our outlook from 2035 onwards. And that's because it takes time. We think this will take time to take hold. And in the intervening period, we probably think there are other factors that will shape the energy mix. Particularly in the growth of fleets in China and India, we are expecting much more growth of natural gas. And additionally, we're probably going to see a growth in biofuels and what we call transition solutions that will help. But in the long term, we believe that electrification is the destination. And in addition, we think that hydrogen can play a supporting role, particularly on use cases where electricity perhaps isn't the ideal solution. So that's kind of what I have to say on this.
Marvellous. Great. That's certainly a lot of food for thought there. That's an interesting assessment. Alex, what hurdles do you see in real life to achieve the BP scenario that Robert has just explained to us?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Well, I think the challenge itself is very well encapsulated in the last slide that Robert showed, yeah? And I think that's the challenge and the beauty of working in mobility at this point in time. because it's probably the first time in history when we have 5 different fuels coming into play. And I think the customers that are joining us today will experience that to the next decades. In the next decade, most of the fleets will actually be hybrid.
Right.
So what that means for us is that, at an extreme, we're going to have to be able to provide 5 different types of fuels on the same site. And with that, the challenge is obviously you're going to have to manage the implications of providing these fuels, especially from a safety point of view. But there's an implication on the footprint, on the layout of a site that's going to have to accommodate and take all these different 5 types of fuels. So the land availability and affordability to accommodate for all these energy types, that's going to be a challenge for sure.
Absolutely.
Next to that, I think Robert made the point about most of these new energy types coming into play would have to be green. And that very often implies availability of power as well in those locations, which very often are remote along the transportation corridors. So availability of green power, it's also going to be a challenge definitely in this space. Now, we've been used to volatility of oil. Now imagine the volatility of 5 different energy types.
Exactly,
And imagine the challenge that a fleet manager and a provider of that type of fuel will have to cope with. It's going to be very much, we're going to be talking today, I guess, quite a lot about total cost of operations and in that space, making the right choices, especially when they require you to invest into new powertrains. That's going to be a challenge that we're going to have to work out together. Now, probably there is also a way to respond to all these challenges, and I think the key word for that is really partnership. Because these things will be addressable by all of us working together, all the players in the ecosystem. Robert mentioned legislation and the predictability of it. I think that's quite important. I think there's a role to play, obviously, for our partners, for our customers. Anchor demand is something that we definitely highly appreciate. It gives us also the confidence and the right inputs to build the right infrastructure at the right time. I think OEMs play a big role, and they are also very much involved into shaping the industry. So I think partnerships will be probably the key lever to pull to tackle all these challenges, which are by no means minor.
No, exactly. Oliver, what was your reaction to the scenarios outlined in the Outlook?
Well, I think it's very clear that my take out would be it's about electrification, and it's going to be, the majority of the vehicle park will be electrified. Some of it may be, there is a role perhaps for hydrogen, very niche. Maybe that's more in the long haul, heavy duty sector. I think it's going to take time. That's the other piece that Robert mentioned. Cost is a big factor in all of this. So total cost of ownership, and Alex just mentioned that as well. Pace of regulatory change and the consistency of regulatory support, these are fundamental elements to help planning for turnover in fleet. So, there's lots to digest in all that material.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hydrogen's an interesting one, isn't it? A lot of people think it's a fair way out yet, and that electric will be the forerunner, if you like, or certainly the bigger part of the picture. Before we came on air, as it were, you were saying you'd love it if hydrogen was a bigger part of the picture for BP. Could you just kind of expand on that?
Well, I think, we are... Obviously, we're, in some ways, BP's view has always been we aim to provide the fuels that our customers want. Let's be honest. We, as a customer-focused business, that's what we want to do. So it does depend, of course, on what our customers are actually asking for. But I think as a company that for a long time has supplied liquid fuels and distributed fuels across the world, I mean, we would relish the challenge of being able to provide hydrogen if it was an economic choice. And I don't think, for us, that we would feel limited in that way. But, it has to be economic. I think that's the key point.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe just to build on it. I mean, that really is the total cost of ownership point here. And I think many of us have seen over the last couple of years cost inflation really hit us, and it's not only on the cost of purchasing the vehicle, but it's also on the energy supply, it's maintenance, it's driver costs, it's all of these pieces. That also plays into, the speed at which some of these new technologies can scale up. So how many vehicles can you can OEMs produce, and how much infrastructure, whether it's charge points or in this case, Robert, you mentioned hydrogen, how quickly can that be introduced? These are whole system changes. They take time to do. And as you said right in the beginning, we don't know. We can be wrong. But I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of the vehicle park will be electrified, light duty, medium duty, parts of heavy duty, and there will be a role for this and any other new technology that we may be not even discussing yet.
Sure, absolutely. So I guess to summarise what we've heard, particularly from Robert, is maybe three messages. The world isn't on the right trajectory, and we need to maybe get back on the right trajectory, if I can say it. In passenger cars, the transition to electric is underway, and globally the world should see the balance flip to EVs in this segment in around 2030. For vans used in last-mile delivery, these are advanced in their journey to electrification and will follow a similar trajectory to passenger cars. But for heavy-duty trucks, the picture is much more complicated, obviously, and will still be predominantly diesel in the short term and short to medium term. But there's an increasing importance on fuels like HVO, for example, as the industry moves towards electrification. Now let's talk to Alex and Oliver. Alex, I think we know that BP has a strategy for offering lower carbon fuels. Can you give us a quick summary of what you're doing and how customers are responding to it?
We do indeed, and actually I'm glad that you mentioned customers, because we like to believe that our strategy, and that's something that Robert mentioned before as well, it's actually shaped by our customers and by the way they embrace the road to decarbonization. We're providing energy types and different energy types and convenience offer to about 1.8 million drivers every day in Europe, and that's a very, very generous source of data and information that flows into our thinking around building the strategy for the way ahead. Now, as Robert mentioned, I think some sectors have a very predictable way forward, and electrification seems to be the way forward for many, maybe even adjacent spaces to the truck industry. I'm thinking here mostly about vans. Most of our customers do operate both trucks and vans. So for vans, I think the way forward is quite clear. Now for trucks, it goes back to what I was mentioning before. It's going to be a play of 5 different energy types over the next decade. And we are strongly of the belief that the destination is still going to be EV. That's the end destination. That's what we believe. But for the years ahead, there's going to be many other energy types that will come into play, and every of them has to be welcome, because every of them has an upside to give towards low carbon. And the transition fuels, in that sense, play a very important role, especially HVO and biogas. And at BP, we're very glad to offer quite a large number of points of supply for gas, as well as building the HVO network in 8 European markets. So we're going to be investing and continuing to invest into that space, because we do appreciate the role it plays into reducing the carbon emissions. Now, in parallel, we're working on that destination, which is mainly EV-driven. And BP has been very active in building the infrastructure, starting first with the passenger and vans sectors. I mean, we have leading position in terms of ultra-fast charging in Germany, UK. We've been making actually great steps towards electrifying also the main routes for truck transportation. We have opened last year a corridor of 750 kilometers in the Alpine Rhine area, and we're seeing great uptake of consumption there, both with customers that are just in pilot phase or also scaling up. Now, one thing probably I would be keen to say is that sometimes we overlook the importance of digitalization. We talk a lot about the heavy investment that goes into infrastructure, but less praised and probably less seen also. It's a big amount of investment that goes into digital enablement for the EV infrastructure. All of that needs to happen seamlessly for the fleet driver and for the fleet manager. And just to give you an example, BP is also massively investing into EMSP services. And the last point on data I would make, it's making data available to the partners in the ecosystem. Going back to my point about partnership, it's going to be super important. Data is going to be a catalyst for embracing this change and believing in it, actually. And as BP, we're also doing quite a lot in terms of enabling data interchange with APIs and similar systems.
Right, excellent. Okay.
Can I just build on just one point?
Sure, absolutely.
Because something that's often overlooked is, for trucks, is parking. I think and this is building on the digital point, being able to find safe, secure parking spaces, and it's something that we're looking at. There is, generally speaking, just if you look at Europe, a shortage of parking spaces for drivers, and I'm sure that's on the minds of many of our fleet customers as well. So you just want to build on that digital enablement piece.
Absolutely. Oliver, just to stay with you, I mean, we all thought, I think, or a lot of people certainly thought the transition was going to be a bit further along the line by now. Why isn't the transition happening quicker than it actually is?
Oh, thanks, Tim. It's a great question. I think the number one reason is cost. And I mentioned it earlier.
Sure.
We saw that big bump. It's hit all of us. The cost of living crisis is something that flows through and has flowed through into everything. I mean, it started with energy, but then it's gone into goods and materials. And presumably, I'd love to hear from some of our customers, but I guess into driver wages and such like. So that's one big piece. And that flows into total cost of ownership, of course. So the cost of the vehicle, on our side, the provision of the energy, and then the other components of maintenance, insurance, and driver costs. So total cost of ownership is really, really key, particularly in an industry where the margins are wafer thin. And then if you're talking about effectively purchasing new vehicles, different drive systems, you maybe need to manage your fleet differently. That all comes with an extra cost that needs to be passed on. So that affordability question is really top of mind. I would also add, and it's not just over in the cost piece, but it is also on the... I think some of us in the industry have underestimated how long it takes to build infrastructure. It takes, frankly, time to get permits. It takes time to get DNO, connections to the grid. If any of you have ever had to install, solar PV in your home, for instance, sometimes you need to go through various steps, and that's the same for us trying to build chargers, and it gets even harder if you're trying to do things like whole system change into, say, hydrogen, for example. I mean, it's another step of complete change, vehicle infrastructure, and then the wholesale provision in the full value chain. There's that, and then maybe the final point I would bring into this is government regulation, Tim, because you need to have stability, and we've seen, obviously, as costs have gone up, priorities are changing, and then you start to see, well, maybe this comes down, this energy transition priority goes down the list of priorities for countries, and that can lead to less subsidy support. So if you think about incentives for fleets to buy new vehicles, maybe they can get a discount or subsidy on vehicle purchases. So we need consistent, stable policies, and you can plan.
I mean, obviously, we've just got a new government, the new Labour government. I mean, are you optimistic that they may be able to help a little bit more than the Conservatives did, or is it too early to say?
I think, BP works with all governments, is what I would always say. As I just said in my earlier comment, basically it's stability of government support. It's not only government support, it's also regional support. I mean, we think about government, but actually this is a local business. I mean, Alex, you talked about, we've got multiple fuels on a site. It's dealing with local councils. So it's not just the big picture, it's also locally and how you bring councils on and how that flows into permits, how that flows into what the neighbours think, sort of thing.
Michael, we haven't forgotten you over there.
No, I'm listening. I'm listening. All good.
Well, what's you've been waiting very patiently. What's your view on the speed of the transition?
I think the transition is on its way, so I will come back to that in a minute when I show my slides. Commenting on that, what Alex and Oliver said, so I fully agree. I mean, we are really in good shape so far. Where governments can support, and maybe also one point from our side to be underlined, is reducing bureaucracy, which is really sometimes taking a lot of time to apply for a new grid connection. If that takes some months, that's fine, because you can plan it, and you plan it in parallel when you order the truck. If that takes years, what we also have in some countries, so this is simply not acceptable when we talk about a quick electrification. So I think helping from governmental side to bring more speed also on the road, that would be also highly welcome from our side.
Right, okay. Alex and Michael, just thinking, what do you think? It's quite a generic question, but will it be hydrogen or electric that ultimately wins the race for commercial trucking, do you think?
I go first. I would ask
Sure.
the question back, why or? I think it's a good combination also. It's different technologies. It very much depends on the infrastructure. It will not be possible to only do electrification because of the infrastructure at the moment. So we need a lot of charging points for the bigger trucks and very, very fast charging. And especially with longer ranges, longer daily ranges, hydrogen can help. But we don't see that quick coming like battery electric vehicles. I see it
Right.
more on medium term.
Okay. Yeah, because I was going to ask you, how's it shaping up for DHL so far?
Truck electrification is starting now, H2 not yet, so the first 2 pilot trucks are running. Good success. The technology is really good. The fuel is good, all good, but from a TCO perspective, not yet a plan at the moment to roll it out.
Okay. Can I just throw that question over to Alex as well?
I would probably totally subscribe to what Michael just said. That's exactly it. Yeah. Just going to be a matter of, it's great to have both solutions in hand and keep optimizing both. But you just have to acknowledge that at this point in time, EV seems to be the shorter path to parity on TCO versus current fuel types. Yeah.
Sure.
I do think, just to build on that, there is a role for hydrogen, particularly where you need the energy density.
Yeah.
And if you think about heavy payloads and axle weights and things like this, there is a role. If you combine that with long distance tracking, heavy payloads, and also perhaps where you need fast refueling, fast recharging, if you will, I think there is a role for it. The challenge is how long it will take to get down the cost curve. I mean, Michael just mentioned it.
Yeah.
It is today not affordable without substantial subsidy support. That's the key piece to understand.
Yeah.
That I would add actually is the case perhaps with all of these powertrains except for diesel. It's very difficult to beat diesel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everything else at the moment is a bit more expensive, but how much is a bit more, and to what extent are people prepared to pay more? And I would argue but Alex, I'd love to hear your view on this. I think the propensity to pay more is quite limited. What do you think?
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, that for me. I mean, as a journalist working in this industry, it always comes down to cost and infrastructure. They're the 2 big key points that operators throw at me all the time, particularly SMEs who clearly are working on wafer thin margins and see the transition. That they know they've got to get on board, but they're saying, look, this is potentially going to take me under. So who's going to help me? Are my customers going to help me? Probably not.
Tim, I would just
not
probably
always
say,
anyway.
I would just probably say, there is willingness, and we feel that in the market, to accept a certain level of premium in exchange for an acceleration of the decarbonization.
Yeah.
So I'm actually positive about the market. Yes, TCO will continue to matter, but we see actually goodwill and intention to go the extra mile and make that happen. We see more and more customers actually acknowledging that and doing something about it.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Just going back to DHL, Michael, can you give us a quick overview of your role at DHL? What exactly you're involved with over there?
Sure. So I'm in the headquarters of DHL and responsible for the decarbonization of road transportation for the group.
And you have a plan, I understand, to reduce your carbon footprint and a net zero plan, obviously.
Exactly.
How are those plans progressing?
Well, the net zero plan is until 2050, so it's progressing well. You see this on the very first slide. So I want to show quickly also the van discussion that we already had in that webinar. You see how the van situation looks like. So we have at the moment a 60% target to 2030 that we electrify our last mile fleet, which is really on track. You see, we have far more than 35% already switched. So the way to 60% seems to be good. We have more than 38,000 chargers already in our own depot. So every vehicle has one single charger, and we already equipped more than 1,500 depots. So the question is always, so what's then the difficulty to today. And if you go to the next slide, you will see that when we talk about the truck, it's a totally different discussion. So why that? So we came from a perfect world. The truck used, and Oliver said that before, the truck is really working well with diesel. Diesel is the perfect solution. We have thousands of refueling stations. It's the same fuel. It's the same truck. Everything is good. What's happening now is that we need to take care about three things. First of all, it's the technology. So what is the technology, the right technology for the operations today that we have and that we need to deliver to our customers? Secondly, where is the refueling station for that type of technology that might differ? Yeah. And number three is then also which type of energy do we use? Is it green? How green is it? Is it 70? Is it 85% less CO2? How do we count that? And so on. And last but not least, which is the number four, we should not forget the driver, because also the drivers need to understand that anything else they do besides diesel is totally different to that what they had before. What you see here quickly is let's say the two-step approach that we have. We very much buy into LNG, CNG usage at the moment. We have a huge program in Europe, in Germany, where we switched a lot of trucks to bio-CNG, which is great success. If you have the refueling stations in place, and if you find them, and if you plan them in parallel to the purchasing of the truck, that's really a very good case at the moment that we want to roll out further. And also HVO coming, HVO 100. In some countries in Europe, we already have it. In Germany, that took a little bit longer. So that is signed off at the moment that you can use it. But the first proposals now come in for the HVO 100 usage. And the second step you see below is then the electric vehicle and the HVO fuel cell vehicle, which takes some more time. And it's a range issue at the moment. As you know, it's always discussed. Ranges below 300 kilometers are realistic at the moment for the trucks we have at the moment. The ranges that we need beyond 500 kilometers, as said, again, we need to talk about the infrastructure. And the thing in between, the range extender, is gray because it's not yet existing in the European market, and we would very much love to have it, but it's not there. Next slide, please. And this is also the last one. You see the fleet situation. This is very much explaining on the left side the vans. I already mentioned we have a 60% target. We are more than half on the way already, and you see on the right side we have the 30% reduction target for the trucks, and we just have 1% realized at the moment, which is has a lot to do, what we already heard with TCO, has a lot to do with infrastructure, has a lot to do with costs that are coming up per liter or per kilowatt hour. But furthermore, what is really then the point to electrify is how does the grid look like in our own depots, so that we are able to place a lot of DC chargers there, which is not yet the case. So a lot of bureaucratic processes that hinder at the moment the progress towards 30%.
Okay, a lot of stats in there. I hope people are keeping up with all that. That's great. Thank you, Michael. Now, we know that one of the operators' biggest concerns are costs and total cost of operations across their fleets. Can you tell us how lower carbon fuels are working within your TCO for DHL?
When we talk, as I said, when we talk about bio-CNG, for example, it very much depends from country to country. First, that's always the point that we need to make. So we first look into the country. How is the situation there? How is the pricing structure there? We have countries where bio-CNG is a very good option, so which is not that far more expensive than diesel, which is good. We also have countries where it's simply not yet existing or far more expensive. Same for HVO. There are countries where you get HVO for the same price like diesel. Then it's a must do. You have countries where you need to have the discussion because that costs you some cent more than the diesel. It very much differs, but we very much like the discussion as this is an intermediate step for being carbon neutral or having CO2 emissions reduced by 100% with an electric truck, and it's a necessary intermediate step that we need to take.
Okay. Just wondering kind of what success stories can you share? I know our audience watching today will find any tips and watch outs quite valuable to them. What can you tell us, Michael?
Yeah, as said, besides a very good electrification of vans, which is also taking a lot of diesel out of our CO2 balance sheets, and added some green electricity. I think, as said, also CNG, HVO are very good solutions in some countries. So it's always the matter where to find it and how to get it. And what we also like, and this is also a discussion we have with BP, is very open discussion about production availabilities, how to go on the market, and let's say the common understanding that we need to do this, and we find a way forward. And last but not least, what I also like, more and more customers, our customers come and are willing to spend the euro more for the green logistics service, which is also good and good news.
Absolutely. Great stuff. Thanks, Michael. Okay, I think we've got some audience questions now, which we'll get through as quickly as we can, or we'll get through as many as we can. I think there's quite a few. So we'll start with David Hellfire, ominously titled. And this one's to Oliver and to Robert. He asks, how competitive will H2 trucks be in the future against BEV?
Well, I think we spoke a lot about this already. I would quickly just say that, I mean, and you saw it, by the way, in Michael's presentation, electrification in the light duty, medium duty, I think that's just going to continue, without a doubt. The question is into the heavy duty space, and as I mentioned earlier, I think it matters. Hydrogen, I think, may play a role, may be competitive in that, where you need the energy density, where you need the range and the fast refueling. There could well be a space for that. It'll play out, though, I think, in the next decade.
Right. Okay. I've got a note. Sorry, I'm just looking at the screen here. Another one from Martin Ackenboot to Alex about availability and use of HVO, XTL fuels in Europe.
Thanks for the question, Martin. I would just probably focus that on HVO. That's relevant for most of the European geographies. To Michael's point before, I think we don't see scarcity of product in the market at the moment. That's what I would say. I would see the product being quite abundantly supplied in most of the European geographies. We believe that with Germany launching HVO, that would not significantly shift. I think the German market would also see quite a healthy level of supply. Now, the proof point for that is, amongst others, also that you don't see HVO at the moment trade at a premium, at a very high premium. I would say probably that the gap at the moment, and again, we have to bear in mind the volatility of the markets, but at the moment, HVO is not significantly more expensive than diesel. So we really hope that this decarbonization option will be one that more and more customers and logistic companies will promote, will get into actively.
Right, okay. Another question here for Alex, putting you through your paces here. Without big investments, what changes are best to make first for fleets looking to decarbonise? That can be further scaled. Basically, how to start small, if you like. This is, sorry, I should say this is from a guy called Ferdy.
Yeah. Look, it's a good question because we spoke so much about the heavy level of investment going into decarbonizing trucks. So a question about how do you start small feels like a very good question to ask.
Yeah.
I would just say three things. Number one, I think it would be great for you to understand your mobility patterns, your routing, be in good control of all that information, because that's going to be the critical input into understanding option for decarbonizing. I think, secondly, it helps a lot to be in close contact with your customers and understand their financial framework, what's their willingness to pay, and balance the TCO with decarbonization. I think that's a critical question. That's going to inform which type of energy types would be welcome and accepted by the customers. And I think, thirdly, I would probably recommend lean into partnerships, talk to people that can help you assess those options, check feasibility. And we like to believe that BP can be one of the companies that you can speak to help you solve that dilemma.
Excellent. The next question again is for you, Alex. Ian Shepherd, he says, we have a fleet of 150 small vans. What are our medium-term transition options?
Just to keep it brief, because we have so much questions on it, I would say with your profile, I would probably be tempted to look first into the feasibility of depot charging and you have to trust this use case, just like Michael did and showed with the DHL strategy. I think for vans and last mile delivery, electrification based on depot charging, it's a great solution, and you will see massive enhancements in that type of use case with the adoption of software as a service. So there will be more and more sophisticated and better systems to do load management and optimize for cost. But nevertheless, lean into the on-the-go infrastructure that we and many other industry players are building. That's always going to give you even more reliance on switching to EV and having adjacent options that will take away any concern about continuity of service. So depot plus on the go would be my summary.
Sure. Michael, it might be interesting to bring you in here as well. What's your reaction there?
I would have the same answer. So that's it. Look into the daily driving mileage. If this is not far beyond 200 or 300 kilometers, then absolutely agree with Alex.
Right. Okay. Next question is for Robert, who's not said anything for a while. get you back involved. BP Energy Outlook shows a higher carbon emission reduction versus latest ExxonMobil Outlook, which shows higher fossil fuel consumption by 2030 and 2040. So an anonymous question, this one. How confident is BP in this outlook versus Exxon?
Well, I think we have confidence in our own outlook in the sense that we think we've researched it well. So that's our confidence. But I mean, I will simply say that if you look at there's quite a lot of range of opinion actually out there about how well the energy transition can go, about the different shifts in energy between electricity and oil. So the Exxon outlook is probably at the higher end of the range, but there are people who have outlooks that are well below BP. So I accept that other people will have different views. That's the reality. I think Exxon effectively are a skeptic, to be honest, a little bit. And I think we are positive and we believe in the need for reducing emissions and the need to be progressive. That's, I think, the difference.
Fair enough. Okay. Another anonymous question here for Oliver this time. With aggressive challenges in the market for fleet to transition, what are the biggest gaps to deliver our goals?
Well, I think it's a good question, and I interpret that as there are regulatory challenges, particularly for OEMs in producing trucks. In fact, they face quite substantial penalties by the end of this decade. Yeah. So we're not talking very long, right? 5 years or so. So there are substantial hurdles that need to be overcome. So, yeah, I agree with that sort of premise. And then, so how can the gaps be closed is the question.
Sure.
And fundamentally, that is through scale up. There's no way around it. And if you want to get down the cost curve, I think OEMs need to be able to produce tens of thousands of vehicles. And that's then also needs to be facilitated by perhaps the sort of not only the stick part of regulatory support, but also the carrot part. Yeah. And in similar manner, the infrastructure, so players like BP and others need to then be able to offer the commensurate infrastructure coverage to be able to accommodate those vehicles. And in doing that, then you may start to see that you're coming down the cost curve, and then these things become more affordable. So I see it as an affordability challenge from that anonymous questioner.
Yeah. Okay. Don't forget, by the way, people watching, you're perfectly welcome to submit your own questions if you have time. We're slightly running out of time, but these are great questions. Another one here from Martin McAtee to Michael and to Alex this time. Considering the unique challenges of waste collection fleets, such as varying routes, stop-and-go driving and heavy payloads, how can alternative fuels like HVO or biomethane be effectively integrated into these operations to reduce emissions? Who'd like to go first with that one, Michael?
Okay, I can try. I don't know where that is. So I know that we in Germany have biomethane or methane-powered waste collection fleets. So that it's only a matter how to get the biomethane in there in the pump. And secondly, what also is an option, what we do is for HVO, especially also in the UK, we use bunker fuel. So this is also something you can consider for these type of fleets. That what I would say here.
Okay, Alex.
I would agree with Michael, and I think as long as we talk about heavy loads and this type of behaviors, stop and go driving type of behaviors, probably I would say HVO and biomethane are the solution.
Right.
Readily available, while EV will probably take a while.
Yeah.
To Michael's point before, as long as you cannot kind of predict and limit your routing with a special vehicle on a certain range, and you cannot contain the load to a certain level, that still makes it efficient. EV is probably not the first option you would consider for this type of use case.
That makes sense. Makes sense. Another anonymous question here for Alex again and for Robert. How do the predictions factor in the EU regulations for 45% of emissions reduction in heavy-duty space for OEMs reduction by 2030? I hope you understand that one.
Do you want me to take it?
Who'd like to go first? Yeah.
Well, the way we kind of look at this in terms of building our projections is actually I really start with the technology and the TCO and looking at the TCO. So we make our analysis firstly on effectively the technicalities of different use cases for trucks, looking at the TCO, and that's based, of course, on our view on the supply and price of energy. We then obviously look to see how well our modelling is doing against the regulation in that sense. Sure. And we think that the regulation is quite tough, but probably feasible. But it's quite tough, and it's a regulation obviously where the OEM is the obligated party. Yeah. But this is going to involve quite a significant transition in Europe. Yeah. I don't. It will involve quite a lot of change, obviously, in the current decade to get there.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, just racing through a few more questions. These are great. This one's from Joel Eaton to Michael and to Alex this time. With the adoption to EV fleets gathering pace, are there any challenges you envisage around fleet maintenance and vehicle compliance that will change the day operations for fleet or transport managers? Michael, do you want to go first?
I'm always first. Yeah, with regard to point number one, maintenance is a challenge, especially for the big trucks, as the maintenance is at the moment more expensive than the diesel. But the good news is we had the same effect with the electric vans, and that goes down because maintenance is, from our understanding, with less effort for electric vehicles than for diesel vehicles. So we expect this going down, and for sure you need to have a workshop somewhere close to your operations so that you can bring the truck there. So that's point number one. Point number two, I would hand over to Alex, because I don't know compliance issues so far with, they bring a lot of advantages, battery electric vehicles. I don't know if there are any issues so far.
No, I'm not aware of that, of particular compliance challenges, neither, Michael. It may be market specific, but I would probably not elaborate more on that. I'm not aware of more compliance challenges. I would just emphasize what you said. From a service maintenance and repair point of view, an EV should be, if anything, less intensive than an ICE vehicle.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Another question here. Michael, what percentage of emissions, I don't quite follow that one. I don't know if anyone can help me out with that. Yeah. What percentage of emissions are 100 kilometre, 300 kilometre equals 300 kilometre?
I think he's saying how many are more than 1,000?
Are more than 1,000.
More than 1,000.
Right, got you.
I think,
okay.
I hope we only talk about road, so then we leave out aviation and ocean in that case.
Yeah.
So, I mean, starting with the smaller one. So at the moment, percentage of number of vehicles, we always say that we have 80% of the vehicles using 20% of fuel and 20% of the vehicles use 80% of the fuel. So then you know exactly the ranges. So the range is far beyond 500, 600 kilometers, have a big impact also on the fuel consumption. So it's hard to answer that in terms of fuel consumption or in terms of number of fleet or size of fleet. So it's sorry, not very easy. But I think the 80-20 explanation I had that is the only thing I can give quickly. Yeah, that the smaller fleet accounts for 80%, and they only burn 20% of the entire fuel of the company, and the 80% fuel is coming then from 20% of the big fleet.
Understood. Okay. Quite a key question coming in here. Right? This is an interesting one. If probably difficult to answer quickly, but how would you recommend, says this anonymous contributor, how would you recommend starting this journey for a business that's right at the beginning of planning a transition? Obviously, cost will be foremost in their minds, I imagine. Don't know who wants to answer that. I think that's thrown out to the whole audience, to the whole panel.
Well, I'm giving you my sense. Is the first thing is to understand your use case.
Sure.
So understand the dynamics of the use case that you are doing, and then to really analyze how your use case kind of stacks up against the different technology options. I think the initial research there is going to be the kind of how I would start that journey. I would really think that's most important.
Would it be? Yeah.
You'd go along with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. We've got another question here. Another anonymous user. This is to Alex and to Oliver. What are the USPs of BP Fleet Solutions for customers?
Feels like a typical last question you would expect.
Yes.
I would say.
Yeah.
I would just say the following. We spoke about there's going to be 5 energy types that customers will need. We will provide all of them.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I would say. Number two, I think when it comes to decarbonization, we made some bold commitments. We are market leader in Germany on ultra-fast chargers. We have a leading position in UK.
Yeah.
We're making massive investments into the enablement of that EV experience, as I was mentioning before, in the digital space. I would say probably thirdly, we have the pleasure and the expertise built by working with over 200,000 customers from small fleets of 2 or 3. There's been a lot of questions in that space, all the way up to the likes of DHL.
Yeah.
So we have a great source of data and inputs that are shaping up our offer. So we trust that offer will match pretty much the whole market's experience. And number 4, I would just say we're super excited about it. I was mentioning before, there's been no more amazing time to work in mobility than this time, when you're just playing with 5 energy types, digitalization comes in. We just love what we do, I would say.
Certainly makes our job in the media quite interesting as well. Plenty to talk about. So thanks for your questions. I think we've pretty much run out of time, to be honest. So we'll wrap things up at this point. I think summing up today's conversations, it isn't easy, but I think there's some key messages we should probably highlight. Firstly, the energy transition is underway, obviously, and we can see it requires a range of different energy vectors. We've heard BP say that the transition has to be orderly, affordable and reliable, and the energy outlook shows that there's a gap between achieving net zero and where we're currently tracking, if I'm honest. So we all need to do what we can to get there. I think the second point is that the timing of the transition is an individual choice. For your business. BP is already putting the infrastructure in place on the ground, working hard to create a pan-European grid of multi-energy truck hubs. And thirdly, the transition is more than energy. We know the change is coming and we don't want to see any operators left behind, however difficult it may seem to make that switch. And companies like BP are here to help, so please get in touch with them. That's all I have to say, really. Thanks a lot. It's been a great debate. I really appreciate it. So thanks to the panel, and thank you, the audience, for joining. We We hope you enjoyed it and found it interesting. I certainly did. If you'd like to follow up with any with BP on any of the points raised today, please email info@bpfleetsolutions.com. So sorry, so just to say, so good luck on your journeys towards decarbonisation, and thanks for joining us.
Tim, thank you very much for the moderation. And I would just like to say before we switch off, Michael, once again, thank you so much for joining us. There's no better way of running these events than with a customer on it, with a customer that is so advanced in this journey. Thank you so much for joining us.
Very much welcome. Thank you.